Afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series featuring talks from the Middle East Forum. My name is Dexter Van Zyl and I am the editor of Focus on Western Islam. I'm going to be moderating this discussion. Today's guest is Benjamin Baird, director of the Forum's Islamism and Politics. Benjamin has written extensively about Hamtramck, Michigan for FWI. This city, surrounded by Detroit, is perhaps the only U.S. municipality. Well, it's the first one, but its newly minted mayor, Amer Ghalib, has endorsed comments calling African Americans animals, Jews, monkeys, who have been accused of corruption and voting. Yet the media insists on ignoring the Ghalib story. Why so? And what does this augur for Hamtramck, and should Americans care? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Benjamin.
Thank you, Dexter. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I do just want to say that for some reason your audio was coming in kind of soft for me. So I'll do my best to catch your questions there, but in the meantime, we'll just get started here. So as Dexter said, we're here to talk today about a story of a Detroit area politician. His name is Mayor Amer Ghalib. He's from Hamtramck, Michigan. And he was elected as the first Muslim mayor to administer this city, and at the same time that an all-Muslim city council was brought to power and elected in the 2021 elections. And initially, hopes were very high for Hamtramck and its all-Muslim city council when they took political control from really what was a long line of Polish-only mayors. However, as part of Islamism and politics, we take a look at Islamist politicians, Islamist candidates. We track Islamist money in politics. So naturally, we were curious about Hamtramck and its leaders to see if any of them had any Islamist sympathies. And it didn't take long before we found that that was true, in fact, that Mayor Amer Ghalib was a self-professed Salafist. There was a Salafist preacher that he was close to. He attended a wedding by this preacher. This particular preacher is very anti-Semitic. So we decided to take a closer look at the mayor. And what we found was really quite shocking. His Facebook account was just crammed with racist and extremist posts. He mocked George Floyd protesters and suggested that they only came out to steal alcohol. He characterized them as Black people as being alcoholics. He liked a post referring to Blacks as animal and inhuman. The mayor accused Arab world leaders of being secret Jews or becoming Jewish, and all of their followers becoming Jewish as well. He endorsed posts calling Jews, quote, monkeys who tax the air we breathe. He praised the Muslim Brotherhood and Turkey's Islamist government, and he even lionized Saddam Hussein as a heroic martyr. But one of the most alarming posts we found from Mayor Ghalib occurred in March 2020, when he appears to admit to a very serious case of potential voter fraud by influencing absentee voters to change their vote from Joe Biden to Bernie Sanders in the 2020 Democratic primaries, and admitting to filling out actually ballots for 20 people in their families. This is illegal in the state of Michigan, make no mistake about it. So, you know, we wrote about this. We exposed Ghalib. We published his posts. We took screenshots of them. We were very careful to get accurate Yemeni translations of his Yemeni language posts, but there just wasn't much media interest in the story. And that's basically what I'm here to talk about today. It's not just what Mayor Amer Ghalib did, but why is there no interest when an Islamist who says such things, why isn't he being held accountable? Not just by the media, but by civil rights groups, other politicians. Why is Michigan silent at the moment?
Now, what do you think this means about the quality of public life in Hamtramck and the quality of journalism generally? Has the local paper picked up on any of this?
No, the local paper there is called the Hamtramck Review, and it's not a stranger to controversy. It writes about very racially or religiously sensitive topics all the time. But we've had people call them and ask why they're not covering the story, and they essentially said that they did not want to get involved. The same can be said about Detroit's two major newspapers, one of them being the Detroit Free Press and Detroit News. At one point, we even offered basically to hand the story over to them, give them the scoop if they would run it, just because our big concern was getting locals to hold him accountable, to hold Mayor Ghalib accountable. And it just didn't go that way. There wasn't any interest. At one point, if we were going to hand the story to them, they wanted to get us to give it to a writer who's been very sympathetic of Mayor Ghalib in the past. And that's just not what we wanted to do with the story. You know, when Mayor Ghalib was first elected in 2021, there was a lot of excitement around it. He made international news. There were headlines everywhere talking about this all-Muslim city council and the new Muslim mayor. And journalists were really falling over themselves to talk about how, hey, look, these guys, they're not going to legislate based on their religion. That was the big point of every article. They would quote city council members and the mayor saying, hey, we're not here. We're here to represent everybody. It's going to be an exclusive city. And that's not the way that it's worked. And in fact, that's not the way that Hamtramck has worked for some time. For many years, they've had Islamist city council members, going back to, in fact, in 2015 or 16, it became a majority Muslim city council. And they've been pushing basically Islamist reforms for a very long time. In Hamtramck, for instance, you will hear the call to prayer 3 times a day blasted over loudspeakers, one of very few settings in America where this is heard. There's currently an ordinance before City Council that is looking at animal sacrifice in people's backyards during Ramadan, during Eid. And they're trying to legalize this so that, you know, Muslim Americans, Yemeni, Bangladeshi immigrants can sacrifice goats in their own backyards. There's also been controversies over flying the gay pride flag in the city. Mayor Ghalib just basically fired the entire Human Relations Commission because one of its members decided to fly a gay pride flag without getting his permission. And he's replaced those members with some of his friends from the Muslim American community, or at least that's what he appears to be doing so far. So this is a city that has a history of instituting Islamist reforms, for lack of a better word. I don't like to be too alarmist. I don't like to say that Hamtramck is the caliphate of Michigan. I don't like to say that Hamtramck is going to, you know, completely be dictated by Sharia law. But there's no mistake that they are instituting laws in this city that are based on strict Islamist principles. And I think that's very unique in Hamtramck.
Yeah. Now, what's the pushback been like? Has there been, I mean, what's the pushback been like? Has there been any?
You know, it's growing. It's been small at first. One thing I think people need to keep in mind is that Hamtramck is a rather insular city. It's an enclave. It's an incorporated city surrounded by Detroit. And even before it became Muslim majority, they kind of stuck to their own there. They enjoyed their independence. And the same can somewhat be said today. So many of the Hamtramck citizens that I've talked to have frankly been afraid to say anything. They've wanted to work with us. They've wanted to say something or do something, but they've wanted to remain anonymous and behind the scenes because they're afraid of reprisals there. Especially for non-Muslims and African Americans who are the minority there. African Americans make up about 17% of the population, and estimates of the Polish community, what's left of it, suggests that it could even be lower than the African American community. So they are a minority there, and they're scared. They don't want to say much. Now, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been some pushback. There were two very brave Hamtramck residents, two women who went before the city council. They read our article on Mayor Ghalib, and they held him to account. They asked the city council to censor him. They asked for him to apologize. And his response to that was to call, basically to call our story, people who wrote the story about him, opportunistic parasites. And to say that anybody who reads or believes in that story is also an opportunistic parasite. This is a mayor calling his constituent a parasite. That's new to me. You know, you hear lawmakers all the time talk about their political opponents in this manner, or the media, but their own constituents, this is rare. But Mayor Ghalib has that type of personality. Just a few days ago, there was an African-American gentleman who held him to account for, during a recent city council meeting, saying that, you know, they were going over what the city charter says about hiring a city manager. And as one city council member started reading this, Mayor Ghalib interrupted immediately to say, it doesn't have to be a white person. It doesn't say that anywhere, with no context to explain why. That's what he said. And this African-American gentleman was very upset about that. He said that he would sue the city if it wasn't a non-Muslim who was elevated to the city manager position. And he basically got in a shouting match with the mayor, who called the Hamtramck Review, which initially reported on his comments, called them fake news. So Hamtramck Review, I guess, is in the same boat as we are, as opportunistic parasites and fake news.
For them, I watched that on YouTube, and I saw that interaction, and the gentleman during the public forum, he brought fire. He brought the fire. He was furious with what he had seen. Now, one of the things is that, do you think people at a certain point are just going to get tired of the controversy? Because if you look at the council proceedings, there's a lot of other problems that they need to worry about. They've got problems with tax abatements. People are furious about their tax bills. They're furious about a number of other issues that basically have to do with normal governance of a city. Do you think in the long run this is going to prove to be a distraction that'll kind of force people to make changes in the city?
I think we're going to see Mayor Ghalib continue to expose himself for who he is. So while this particular scandal may start to blow over time, I mean, we saw, given the opportunity to speak, when he mentioned not hiring a white person, you know, these things are going to resurface. It's not just Mayor Ghalib either. It is the city council needs to be taken a look at as well. We've reviewed their Facebook posts, their social media accounts as well. And there is a definite pattern of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel content on all of their Facebook pages, except for one who I believe is too old, I think, to have a Facebook page, or not too old, but simply chooses not to have one. So this is a pattern. This is something we're going to see not just from Mayor Ghalib, but from other members of the city council. But I think the real big issue here is the potential election fraud. This is the issue that I don't think Mayor Ghalib can get to go away. For one, election fraud has been a problem in Hamtramck for many years now. Going back to 2013, there was a mayoral candidate, there was a city council candidate. Both complained of being approached by elected officials who offered them absentee ballots in exchange for the support of their campaigns. One of them is a currently serving city council member, Mohammed Hassan, who offered a woman, a Black activist who was running for city council, he offered her 26 votes in exchange for her drumming up support for him through the African American community. Also in 2013, there were 4 men indicted and eventually convicted for absentee ballot fraud, for mishandling absentee ballots. Then in 2017, another city council member, Naeem Chowdhury, had his offices raided, had his father's car impounded, as members of the Michigan State Police spent about 2 months in the city investigating potential ballot fraud, election fraud. In 2020, Mohammed Hassan again, the Michigan the Michigan Attorney General had to send him a cease and desist letter because he was offering to drive to help people fill out their absentee ballots and drive them to the polls. So when Mayor Ghalib brings up that he potentially filled out as many as 20 people plus their families' absentee ballots, this is a long history, and this is something that should not go away. Dana Nessel, the current Attorney General of Michigan, has investigated people for far less than what Mayor Ghalib admits to potentially doing. She convicted a grandmother for filling out an absentee ballot for her grandson because she felt that he wouldn't be able to make it on election day. There's also a number of nurses who filled out ballots for people at nursing homes. Whether or not that was something purposeful and meaning to defraud the system, I'm not very sure. But in any case, these have to be at least equal to what Mayor Ghalib has done. And so far, there isn't much to suggest that the state of Michigan is doing much, not just for Mayor Ghalib, but for the city of Hamtramck. Election fraud is supposed to be relatively rare in this country, or at least that's what we heard after the 2020 elections. And as a result, let's prosecute the cases that at least that we do know of. And that's simply not happening here. So let's hold them to account. That they have an election fraud detection team in the Michigan Secretary of State's office. Have them review the ballots in Hamtramck to look for similar signatures, or to see if at least 20 people signed saying that they had someone else fill out the ballots for them on March 8th. There's many ways that they can look into this. But so far, if they're acting very slowly. We haven't been able to confirm an investigation.
Now, one of the questions that came up in the Q&A is, do you think the race card is one of the reasons why journalists are reluctant to cover this? Can you talk in general about the factors that contribute to journalistic evasion of responsibility? What's going on here?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Race card, or at least the so-called Islamophobic card, is a big deal in this situation. We wrote about a piece in the Federalist about why the media is ignoring this problem. I pointed to three major issues. The first of these is that Muslims, at least the way progressives tell it in the establishment media, Muslims are the victims, never the perpetrators of bigotry. There is a great deal of buy-in to the so-called Islamophobic narrative. They want to show that Muslims today are like African Americans in the pre-civil rights era. You even hear some people suggest that, in a very tone-deaf suggestion, that Muslims are the new black, I've heard. So they want to show them as a victim. And of course, when you show Mayor Ghalib in this light and other members of the community, that just doesn't mesh with their worldview. The other problem here, number two, and I think this is a big deal, is that Hamtramck, their motto, the world in 2 square miles. It essentially serves as a proving ground for multiculturalism. This is what progressives have always talked about with open borders, and with wanting to, with all cultures are equal. But that isn't the case here. We need to acknowledge that there are cultural imports from Yemen and from Bangladesh even that are undesirable in America. And when they don't assimilate, that there are problems with this. For instance, in Yemen, there is a very long history of Black oppression. Yemen is one of the last holdouts of slavery in the world. Hard for people to imagine in the 21st century, but it's true. African Americans are referred to as the marginalized in Yemen. That is what they are called, because they are in fact marginalized. They have menial, low-paying jobs. They have no access to upward social mobility. African Americans, or I'm sorry, Black people, dark-skinned people, treated very poorly in Yemen. There's also even smaller things like garbage, nuisance, and trash. There was a former city council member in Hamtramck who pointed out that, we need to be more sensitive culturally about the fact that many of our Bangladeshi and Yemeni immigrant communities, they didn't come from places that had trash collection. And so they didn't grow up around this. So they're not used to avoiding littering and making sure that their trash is disposed of properly. This is not an insult. It is just a common reality of the world we live in. Certain people grow up with certain different standards. Some people certainly don't have access to trash collection that are fighting a civil war, as they are in Yemen. And so, but in acknowledging this, the city council member was censured. And in fact, they were going to try to recall him for it. But these are two of the sort of cultural imports that we see, and that the media does not want to discuss. And the third problem is of course election fraud. People do not want to acknowledge that election fraud is a problem in this country, however small. Even if it is limited to a handful of cases, there is an interest from the media, especially after 2020, to suggest that these are the most secure elections we've ever had, and that it's impossible, that our elections are impenetrable. And as Hamtramck has demonstrated, this isn't the case. But even more off-putting to the mainstream media is that this is an immigrant community that is involved in election fraud. And that is something they don't want to acknowledge. There was a study a few years ago about immigrant election fraud, immigrant voting, and there was definitely a strong interest in suppressing or fighting that study that suggested that there was a problem for non-citizen voting in this country. So I think those three factors are why the media doesn't want to touch the story.
All right. So what are your private messages on Facebook and direct messages on Twitter like these days? Are you getting any interesting ones?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of people that have reached out to me privately and said, I want to do something about this, but I'm afraid. And they've been releasing information to me over time, a lot of stories that are very enlightening. For instance, there was an African-American businesswoman in town who she was trying to get zoning to allow her to open a massage parlor in town, and she wasn't allowed to. Residents came in, Muslim Americans came in and said that they didn't think she should be allowed to open her store there because of the clientele it might attract. And of course, she took this as a great insult. Temporarily, she wasn't allowed to open her business there until there was a great deal of pushback. And that allowed her eventually to open her store there, thank goodness. But, this was African Americans in the city, I should say, have a long history of oppression. It was during the 1960s that there were urban renewal projects in Hamtramck, where when the Polish were the majority there, they tried to push out African American families to build freeways or other urban revitalization projects. There's only been 2 African American city council members in Hamtramck's 100-year history. And they've always been at least 13 to 20% of the population there. So they're not being represented. So I think it's important to know that, keep that in mind when you look at Mayor Ghalib's racist comments. But as to your question about personal Facebook comments, yes, I've gotten messages from people that have said that I'm just mad or upset that the Muslims have taken over Hamtramck and that they're turning it into a Muslim city, and that you know, just crazy things, of course, but personal insults from people as well. But that's to be expected. Anytime you upset the power structure of a place like Hamtramck, there's going to be fallout from it.
So where do you think this story is headed? Do you think we're going to start to see some pushback, even from like the Muslim community in Hamtramck? Do you think, I mean, is that ultimately where you think this is headed?
Unfortunately, Amer Ghalib has strong support from the Muslim community, even exposing these things. You know, I would share and be part of different Hamtramck message boards, and at first it was disbelief. People said it was fake news, and then people excused away his comments. You know, that's not to say that it's 100%. There are several Muslim Americans who've also reached out to me and want to be a part of pushing back on this. I think that it's going to take some momentum. It's going to take groups. It's going to take Black civil rights groups. It's going to take citizens within Hamtramck itself. It's going to take members of the city council to hold him accountable and to hold themselves accountable, really, for there to be any kind of change. But I don't have much faith that Amer Ghalib's constituency themselves will hold him accountable. I don't. So hopefully, you know, we can bring pressure to bear from other places.
Where's the NAACP been on this?
The NAACP has not commented. You know, we filed an actual complaint with them. Black Lives Matter as well. They have a complaint system, filed complaints with them. There are some other Black political groups in town that we are just starting to talk to and have been very open and helpful. So I don't want to say that we're not making any progress in this regard. But again, those groups are reluctant to get involved for the same reason that the media is, and for some of the reasons that I discussed early. I think they look at it as a threat to their own identity politics in many ways. And so we're just trying to inform people locally what the problem is, and let them come up with the solutions and share with us how to address them, and we'll support them in any way. But, you know, part of the Counter-Islamist Grid program, which I also am a part of at the Middle East Forum, is understanding the importance of local activism. You know, we're viewed as outsiders in Hamtramck. They view us as outsiders, and we're meddling in their affairs. So we really need locals to pick this up. And one of the things we've done in that regard is to circulate a call to action that asks Hamtramck residents and people of Michigan and the surrounding Detroit area to simply enter in their information, their address, their name, and it will send a letter to each of the 6 members of the city council, plus the mayor, plus the city manager. They will all get a letter explaining that they should censure the mayor, that he should apologize, and he should explain what happened on March 8th with the potential election fraud there. So that's the direction we're pushing this.
All right. Any last points that you think we should have covered?
No, I just want to mention to people that they can go to stopghalibfraud.com if they want to get involved, if they want to sign our call to action, and if they want to read more about the problem. Yeah, definitely. Look, we're not going to rest on this. We're going to hold him accountable, and we're going to take a closer look at election fraud in the city of Hamtramck and see what we come up with. So I'd ask our viewers to stay tuned.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And with that, we have come to the close of our webinar, and I want to thank Benjamin for this. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful to read these articles as they come in. And I would like to remind our viewers that Ashley Perry will be speaking on Wednesday about the upcoming Israeli election on an MEF webinar. and that Irina Zuckerman will be speaking on Friday about the ongoing alliance between the Kremlin and the mullahs of Tehran. And also, I'd ask people to be on the lookout for next week's webinar offerings, which will be emailed to you over the weekend. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful week and a good Labor Day weekend. Thank you so much.